The first thing Lena noticed was the sound. Not the gunshot itself, but the strange, sharp pop that preceded it, like a champagne cork being freed an inch from her ear. It was followed by the crystalline tinkle of the window beside her dissolving into 1,000 glittering diamonds. Have you ever had a moment where time seems to stretch and snap like a rubber band? 1 second, you're breathing. The next, the world is a vortex of motion and you're just a passenger. A hand, firm and unyielding, clamped onto her arm, yanking her down so hard her teeth clicked together. The rich scent of sandalwood and expensive wool filled her senses as she was pressed against the floor of the car, a heavy weight shielding her from above. Another pop, this time a dull thud against the metal frame of the door. The man above her didn't even flinch. His voice was a low growl, a stark contrast to the polite, measured tones he'd used just moments before. "Run, status." A clipped response came from the driver's seat. "2 bikes. Eastbound. We are not the primary target." Thereafter the car behind us, the weight lifted slightly. Lena risked a glance up, her cheek pressed against the cool leather of the seat. Kaido was looking back through the shattered rear window, his face a mask of cold fury. The warm, almost gentle man who had been asking about her charcoal sketches was gone, replaced by a predator. This was the real him. This was the man whose name made an entire coffee shop fall silent. And she was trapped in his car, in his world, a world of champagne pops that weren't celebrations. It all started with a mistake. An hour ago, her biggest problem was finding the right shade of gray for fabric design. How did a simple cup of coffee at the wrong table lead to this? How did one tiny, insignificant choice put her in the crosshairs of a bullet? For hours earlier, the world had been quiet. The Gilded Bean was Lena's weekly indulgence, a small, ridiculously overpriced coffee shop with wide oak tables and the best natural light in the city. As a textile design student living on a shoestring budget, one $10 cup of matcha was her entire entertainment budget for the week, but the productivity it bought her was priceless. She could spread out her portfolio, her charcoal pencils, and her swatches without getting a single dirty look from the staff. It was her sanctuary. Today, she'd gotten lucky. The coveted corner booth was empty, a plush velvet bench tucked away from the main flow of traffic, with a perfect view of the rain-streaked street. She slid into the seat, the beige fabric of her favorite oversized shirt bunching up as she settled in. She pulled out her laptop and her sketchbook, arranging them just so. This was her ritual, the small act of control that made her feel like a professional, not just a student drowning in deadlines. Her phone buzzed. It was her best friend, Chloe. "How's the portfolio grind? Don't let the imposter syndrome win." Lena smiled, texting back a quick reply. "Fighting it with caffeine and overpriced pastries." The usual, she ordered her matcha and a croissant, the buttery scent a welcome comfort against the damp chill of the afternoon. For an hour, she was lost in her work. The world outside, with its gray skies and hurried pedestrians, was just a muted backdrop to her own creative focus. She was sketching a new pattern, a complex geometric weave inspired by Art Deco architecture, when a shadow fell over her table. She looked up, expecting a waiter, but was met with a man in a perfectly tailored black suit. He was tall and severe, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. He simply looked at her, then at her scattered work, his gaze dismissive. The air around him felt 10 degrees colder. The man's voice was as starched and severe as a suit. "This table is reserved." It wasn't a question or a polite suggestion. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. Lena's cheeks flushed with heat. She glanced around. The cafe was busy, but she hadn't seen any reservation signs. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she began, already gathering her pencils, her mind racing. "I didn't see a sign. I can move right away." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a stupid, frantic rhythm of embarrassment. She hated causing a scene. The man, however, didn't move. He stood there like a statue, a silent, imposing guardian of the booth. His stillness was more unnerving than any shouted command. It was then that the atmosphere in the entire cafe shifted. The low hum of conversation, the clink of ceramic on saucer, it all just faded. A silence, thick and heavy, descended as the bell above the door chimed. Lena followed everyone's gaze. A second man walked in. He was nothing like his severe companion. Where the first man was all sharp lines and cold presence, this man moved with a fluid, almost lazy grace. He wore a dark gray cashmere coat over a simple black shirt, the clothes understated but screaming wealth. His face was calm, his features sculpted, but it was his eyes that held the room captive. They were dark and intelligent, scanning the space with a placid ownership that was absolute. He was the center of gravity, and everyone else was just orbiting debris. He walked directly to their table, his gaze flicking from his stoic associate to Lena, who was still half-crouched, clutching her sketchbook to her chest. "Run," the newcomer said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. "Is there a problem?" The man named Run inclined his head slightly. "This is the designated table." The young woman was already here, he said, young woman as if it were a foreign species he was identifying for a report. The newcomer's eyes settled on Lena. It wasn't a threatening look, but it was intensely dissecting. He saw the beige shirt, the charcoal smudges on her fingers, the panic in her eyes. Then his gaze moved to the empty seat across from her, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. A long moment passed. He knew his expected guest wasn't coming. It was a deliberate, calculated insult, and everyone in this room, everyone who mattered, knew it too. A public snub. He could have turned and left. He could have had Rin forcibly remove her. Instead, he did the last thing Lena expected. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He gave Rin a look that was a clear dismissal, and the severe man stepped back, melting into the shadows as if he'd never been there. The man then slid gracefully into the velvet booth directly across from her. "Please don't leave on my account," he said, the smoothness of his voice doing nothing to calm the frantic beating of Lena's heart. He gestured to her seat, an invitation that felt like a command. She slowly, awkwardly, sat back down, her portfolio digging into her ribs. The entire cafe was still watching them, a silent audience to a play she didn't have the script for. "I believe you were here first," a waitress appeared, her hands trembling slightly as she held her notepad. She didn't even look at Lena. Her eyes were fixed on the man opposite her. He didn't look at the menu. "2 pots of the Gyukuro tea," he ordered softly. "And bring the lady another croissant." He glanced at Lena's half-eaten one as if it had personally offended him. The waitress scurried away. Lena clutched her sketchbook like a shield. "Look, I'm really sorry about the mix-up. I can go." He simply watched her, his head tilted. "The table is no longer needed for its original purpose. And I dislike drinking tea alone. Please stay." His politeness was a fortress. There was no way to argue with it, no way to refuse without causing an even bigger scene. She was trapped. "I'm Kaido," he said, extending a hand across the table. His fingers were long and elegant, his grip surprisingly warm and firm when she hesitantly shook it. "Lena," she managed, her voice barely a whisper. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Lena." The way he said her name, letting it roll off his tongue, felt proprietary, as if he was testing its weight. "Are you an artist?" He nodded toward her sketchbook. The question was so normal, so disarming, that it almost made her forget the silent tension gripping the room. "A student," she corrected, finding a small sliver of solid ground. "Textile design." A genuine spark of interest lit his eyes. "Fascinating. A discipline of structure and creativity. Of finding the beauty in the pattern." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "It requires one to see not just the thread, but how the entire tapestry weaves together." The conversation was a strange mix of the mundane and the profound. He asked about her inspirations, her techniques, her ambitions. She found herself talking, explaining her fascination with the repeating motifs of the natural world, the mathematical precision of ancient weaving methods. For a few minutes, he made her forget he was a man who could silence a room with his presence. He was just a man, intelligent and curious, who was interested in her art. It was intoxicating.
And it was a lie.
She knew on some primal level that this was a performance. His sitting here with her was a move in a game she couldn't comprehend. She was a prop, a placeholder, a message to someone who wasn't there. But the warmth in his eyes when she described her work felt real. The attentive way he listened felt real. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The tea arrived, served in delicate porcelain cups. The steam was fragrant, a calming green scent that was at odds with the frantic energy buzzing under Lena's skin. Kaido poured for both of them, his movements precise and elegant. It was a small, intimate gesture that felt deeply unsettling. He was playing a part, the charming gentleman, and he was playing it flawlessly. Lena took a sip, the warmth spreading through her chest, but it didn't reach the knot of ice in her stomach. "You have a good eye," he said, his gaze dropping to the open page of her sketchbook. It was the Art Deco pattern. Symmetry, balance, but with an unexpected disruption in the flow. It draws the eye. He was looking at her drawing, but it felt like he was describing himself. He was the disruption in her perfectly symmetrical afternoon. She found her voice, a flicker of her usual self returning. That's the point. Perfect patterns are boring. The flaw is what makes it interesting. A real smile touched his lips this time, reaching his eyes. A dangerous philosophy, Lena. Some people spend their entire lives eliminating flaws. Before she could reply, the world outside the window exploded. The sound was a deafening roar, a concussive blast that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't a sharp pop from the car. This was something bigger. The cafe's large pane of glass didn't just shatter. It bowed inwards and then disintegrated into a storm of glittering shrapnel. Screams erupted around them. Lena's training, the muscle memory from 1,000 mundane fire drills, screamed at her to get down. But Kaido was faster. In a single, fluid motion, he was across the table, his arm hooking around her waist and pulling her from the booth. He shielded her body with his own as they hit the floor, the air raining glass and plaster dust. The scent of sandalwood was overwhelming, a strange anchor in the chaos. His body was a solid wall of heat and muscle over her. She could feel the calm, steady beat of his heart against her back, a stark contrast to her own frantic, rabbit-like pulse. Men in black suits, run among them, materialized from nowhere, forming a protective perimeter, weapons drawn. The quiet coffee shop had become a war zone in seconds. Back exit.
Now.
Kaido's voice was no longer smooth. It was a blade of pure command. He hauled her to her feet, keeping her tucked tightly against his side, his arm a band of steel around her. They moved through the screaming, panicking crowd, his men clearing a path like a ship parting water. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and fear. They burst through the kitchen, past terrified staff huddled against stainless steel counters, and out into a rain-soaked alley. A black, armored sedan was waiting, its engine already running. Ren wrenched the back door open, and Kaido pushed Lena inside before sliding in behind her, slamming the door shut. The car lurched forward, tires squealing on the wet asphalt, just as the first pops of gunfire echoed from the front of the cafe. And it was in that moment, pressed against the cool leather, the city lights smearing past the windows, that she found herself in the scene from the beginning of her nightmare. The car swerved, and the motorcycle appeared, the glint of steel in the rider's hand. Kaido moved to cover her, and the bullet hit the door with a dull, final thud. Her past had caught up with her. There was no going back to the girl sketching in the corner booth. That girl was gone, shattered along with the cafe window. The penthouse was less a home and more a statement. It occupied the entire top floor of a sleek, anonymous glass tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking, panoramic view of the glittering, rain-slicked city. The furniture was minimalist and brutally expensive, all sharp angles and monochrome colors. It was beautiful, sterile, and utterly devoid of personality. It felt like a museum or a very luxurious prison. Lena stood shivering in the center of the vast living room, wrapping her arms around herself. The beige shirt felt thin and useless against the sudden chill that had settled deep in her bones. Kaido was on the phone, his back to her, speaking in rapid, low Japanese. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was lethal. He paced back and forth in front of the window, a caged tiger outlined against the skyline. Ren stood silently by the door, a statue in a suit, his eyes constantly scanning, missing nothing. When Kaido finally hung up, he turned to her. The cold fury was gone, replaced by a controlled calm that was somehow more frightening. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. She shook her head, though a stinging sensation on her forearm caught her attention. A thin, red line of blood was welling up from a scratch she hadn't even felt herself get. Before she could dismiss it, Kaido was there, gently taking her arm. His touch was surprisingly soft. He led her to a white leather sofa and pushed her down gently. "Stay here." He disappeared into another room and returned with a first aid kit. He knelt in front of her, the picture of calm concern, and began cleaning the small cut with an antiseptic wipe. The gesture was so tender, so at odds with the violence they had just escaped, that it made Lena's head spin. "This was not supposed to involve you," he said quietly, his focus entirely on her arm. "You were just an unexpected variable." "A variable?" she repeated, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "People just tried to kill us. A bomb, or whatever that was, went off. That's a little more than a variable, don't you think?" He finished applying a small bandage, his fingers lingering on her skin for a moment longer than necessary. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting hers. "It was a business disagreement," he said, the words a masterful understatement. "My rivals are not known for their subtlety. They intended to send a message. By blowing up a coffee shop full of innocent people," she shot back, her fear giving way to a surge of indignation. "What kind of business are you in?" A flicker of something amusement, respect, crossed his face. He stood up, towering over her. "The kind of business where one must be very careful about where one sits and who one is seen with." He looked around the vast, empty apartment. "You will be safe here. My men are securing the building. No one can get to you." But as the words left his mouth, the lights in the penthouse flickered once, twice, and then died, plunging the room into an unnerving darkness, lit only by the distant, indifferent glow of the city. A split second later, Kaido's phone buzzed with an alert. Ren was already speaking into his wrist. "Power is out on the top 3 floors. Elevator override initiated." Stairwell access compromised. Kaido's promise of safety had evaporated in an instant. The message from his rivals wasn't over. It was just getting started. And they were trapped at the top of a glass tower with no way down. The darkness was absolute and suffocating. The only light came from the faint glow of Kaido's phone and the distant cityscape, which now felt mocking in its normalcy. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her heart, which had just begun to slow, kicked back into a frantic rhythm. They weren't safe. They were cornered. "There in the building," Kaido stated, the words flat and devoid of panic. He was already moving, his silhouette a dark shape against the faintly glowing windows. "Ren, west stairwell. Take 2 men. I want a perimeter on this floor. No one gets through that door." Ren simply nodded, a ghost in the dark, and vanished with 2 other men who had appeared as if from the very shadows. Kaido turned back to Lena. In the dim light, she could see the glint of something metal in his hand. A gun. The reality of it, the cold, hard finality of it, sent a fresh wave of terror through her. This wasn't a movie. This was real. "Stay away from the windows," he commanded, his voice a low, urgent whisper. He pulled her toward the center of the room, behind a large, solid-looking marble bar. "Stay down." He crouched beside her, pressing her shoulder to keep her low. The silence was the worst part. It stretched on, thick with anticipation. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, sounded like an approaching footstep. Lena squeezed her eyes shut, her mind racing. This was insane. She was a design student. She sketched patterns. She didn't crouch behind marble bars while men with guns hunted other men with guns. She had a project due on Friday. The The thought was so absurdly mundane that a hysterical little laugh bubbled in her throat, which she quickly choked back. Kaido shot her a sharp look.
Focus, he hissed.
Listen. She forced herself to breathe, to listen past the pounding of her own blood in her ears. Nothing. And then a faint sound, a soft scrape. Not from the door. From outside.
Kaido heard it too.
His body went rigid. It came from the direction of the wide glass doors that led to the balcony.
Impossible.
They were dozens of stories up. But Lena's eyes, now adjusting to the dark, caught something. A flicker of movement. Not a person, but a reflection. The massive, dark television screen mounted on the wall opposite the balcony was acting like a black mirror. In it, she could see the distorted reflection of the city lights, the balcony railing, and a shape, a human silhouette, roped and harnessed, slowly descending from the roof. The attacker wasn't coming through the door. He was coming from above. The balcony, she gasped, her voice a choked whisper, pointing a trembling finger at the TV screen. Kaido didn't hesitate. He didn't question her. He moved with the same shocking speed he'd shown in the cafe. He was across the room in 3 silent strides just as the glass of the balcony door imploded, not with a loud bang, but with a quiet, precise shattering. A figure in black, tactical gear swung through. Kaido met him head-on. The struggle was brutal, silent, and swift. There were no heroic one-liners, just the sickening thud of bodies colliding, the grunt of exertion. Lena could only watch, paralyzed, as the 2 dark shapes fought in the gloom. It was over in less than 10 seconds. Kaido stood, breathing heavily, the other man motionless on the floor. He turned back to her, his chest rising and falling. The look he gave her was different. The cool assessment was gone, the predatory focus softened. It was replaced by a raw, unfiltered shock. And respect. You see the whole tapestry, he said, his voice rough, repeating his own words from the cafe. He wasn't talking about her art anymore.
He was talking about her.
In that moment, something inside her snapped. The fear, the confusion, the feeling of being a helpless pawn, it all coalesced into a single point of fiery anger. She got to her feet, her legs shaking but holding. Enough, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. No more business disagreements, no more unexpected variables. You'll tell me exactly what is going on. You will tell me who these people are and why they want you dead. You put me in the middle of this. The least you can do is give me a name for the bullet I'm dodging. Kaido stared at her, the gun still held loosely at his side. The demand hung in the air between them, sharp and clear. He had expected tears, panic, maybe even fainting. He had not expected this fiery, defiant anger. He had not expected a boundary. He let out a slow breath, the tension in his shoulders releasing slightly. He walked over to the man on the floor, checked him with professional detachment, and then seemed to dismiss him entirely. He finally turned his full attention back to Lena, the look in his eyes one of profound recalculation. You're right, he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of an admission. He gestured back toward the relative safety of the sofa. The truth is complicated, he began to explain, his words measured and clipped, stripping the situation down to its brutal essentials. The blind date was supposed to be with Akari Tanaka, the only daughter of his chief rival in the city, Kenji Tanaka. It wasn't a date, it was a truce negotiation, a potential alliance between 2 powerful Yakuza families, symbolized by a public meeting. Akari's failure to appear was a message from her father, Kaido explained, his eyes dark with memory. A declaration that he would not negotiate, that he saw me as weak. It was a public challenge. Lena's mind reeled. Yakuza. The word landed in her stomach like a stone. This wasn't just some corporate rivalry. This was organized crime. So, when you sat down with me, she trailed off, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. When I sat with you, Kaido finished for her, his gaze unwavering, I sent a message back. That his challenge was irrelevant. That his daughter was of no consequence. I chose a stranger, an artist, over his dynasty. He paced the room, the earlier predatory energy returning. Tanaka cannot tolerate such an insult. He responds not with strategy, but with brute force. He wants to erase the insult. That means erasing me. And now he stopped and looked at her. It means erasing you. The symbol of his humiliation. The weight of his words crushed the air from her lungs. She wasn't just a witness or collateral damage. She was the reason. Her accidental choice of a coffee table had made her a target for the Japanese Mafia. The absurdity and terror of it were so immense, she felt dizzy. Before she could process it, Ren appeared at the doorway, his suit immaculate despite the chaos. The building is secure for now, he reported. But Tanaka's people are leaking a story. The attack on the cafe is being framed as a gang hit. And they're circulating a photograph. He held out his phone. Kaido took it, his expression hardening. He showed the screen to Lena. It was a blurry photo, clearly taken on a cell phone from across the cafe. It showed the two of them at the table leaning in deep in conversation. They looked intimate. The caption, already spreading through gossip blogs and social media, read, Syndicate boss Kaido Ishikawa's new mystery woman. Is this the face that launched a war? They hadn't just made her a target. They had given her a name and a role in their twisted drama. They were painting a bullseye on her back for the entire world to see. Lena stared at the phone, at her own face, blurry and anonymous, yet so horribly exposed. Her identity was being rewritten, twisted into a character in a story she never auditioned for. Mystery woman, face that launched a war, it was insane. She felt a wave of nausea. Her normal life, her classes, her portfolio, her friend Chloe, it all felt like it was on another planet, a life lived by someone else. We have to counter it, Kaido said, his voice pulling her back from the edge of panic. He was already in strategic mode, the personal danger secondary to the information war. If they control the narrative, they control your level of risk. They paint you as a disposable conquest, and you become an easy target. But if we control the narrative, he looked at her, a plan already forming behind his eyes. We make you untouchable, untouchable. Lena scoffed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. A man just tried to climb down the side of the building to kill us. How do we get more touchable than that? We change your status, Kaido said simply. From a mystery to a fact. From an insult to an established relationship. Tanaka can justify killing a random woman his rival spent an hour with. It is much harder, politically, for him to kill the recognized and acknowledged partner of that rival. It breaks certain rules. Lena understood immediately. He was going to make the lie real. He was going to announce to his world, and hers, that she belonged to him. The idea was terrifying, a cage snapping shut around her. But she also saw the cold, brutal logic in it. Anonymous, she was a loose end. As his partner, she was a statement. My team is already preparing a release, he continued, already turning away to make the call. A more flattering photograph. A brief story about a new relationship. We will seed it to more reputable outlets. We will make you a person, not just a mystery. No, Lena said, the word coming out with surprising force. Kaido stopped, turning back to her slowly.
No.
If you're going to invent a life for me, she said, her chin lifting, then I get a say in what that life looks like. I'm a design student, not a gangster's mall. If we're telling a story, then we're going to tell it my way. She took a deep breath, her mind, so used to finding patterns and creating aesthetics, suddenly firing on all cylinders. No blurry photos. You have security feeds. Find a clear one. And the story isn't about me being your new woman. The story is that Kaido Ishikawa, notorious recluse, is investing in the arts. He's become a patron for a promising young textile designer. The meeting was professional. The attack was an unfortunate coincidence. Frame me as an asset, not a conquest. Kaido stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a long moment he said nothing. Ren, still standing by the door, raised a single, intrigued eyebrow. Kaido had built an empire on control, on dictating every term and planning every move. And this young woman, this artist who had stumbled into his life by sheer chance, was not just setting a boundary. She was seizing control of the narrative he had just proposed. A slow smile spread across Kaido's face. It was the first completely genuine, unguarded smile she had seen from him. A patron of the arts, he mused, tasting the words. Clever, Lena. Very clever. The power dynamic had shifted again.
She was no longer just the pawn.
She was a player. And in this dangerous, terrifying game, she had just made her first move. In the days that followed, the penthouse became a strange, gilded cage. While Kaido's team worked to disseminate their carefully crafted story, Lena was a prisoner of her own safety. The view of the city was a constant reminder of the world she couldn't return to. She spent hours on the white leather sofa, sketching furiously in her book, the charcoal pencils a desperate link to her former life. The patterns she drew were sharper now, more chaotic, full of jagged edges and broken symmetries. Kaido was a constant, unnerving presence. He wasn't always in the room, but she could feel the weight of his existence in the silent efficiency of the apartment. Meals appeared on schedule. Her favorite tea was always stocked. A new set of high-end art supplies, far better than her own, was delivered without a word. He was observing her, learning her, in a way that was both thoughtful and deeply intrusive. He would watch her draw, his expression unreadable. "Why did you choose textiles?" he asked one evening, his voice a low rumble in the quiet room. Lena didn't look up from her page.
"Because it's honest," she said.
"You can't lie with a thread. The tension has to be perfect. The pattern has to be precise. One mistake, one loose weave, and the entire structure is compromised." "It's real." Kaido was silent for a long moment. "My world is the opposite," he finally said. "It is built entirely on lies, on flawed structures held together by fear. Nothing is real." The admission was so stark, so vulnerable, that Lena finally looked up. He was standing by the window, not as a predator surveying his territory, but as a man trapped within it. The city lights cast long shadows across his face, highlighting a weariness she hadn't seen before. In that moment, he wasn't the untouchable Yakuza boss. He was just a man in a very dangerous, very lonely business. The fear she felt around him began to curdle into something far more complicated. It was a strange, unwelcome empathy. She saw the structure of his life, the perfect, brutal pattern he was forced to maintain, and for the first time, she saw the flaw. It was his isolation. The next evening, she found him in his study, staring at a small, polished wooden board set with black and white stones.
"Go."
"My grandfather taught me," he said, without looking at her. "He said it teaches you to see the whole board, to anticipate your opponents, moves 10 steps ahead. To sacrifice a stone to save the game." He picked up a single white stone, holding it between his fingers. "You," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "are the move I never saw coming." An unexpected stone on the board. "And I do not know whether to sacrifice you or protect you." "Maybe I'm not a stone," Lena replied softly, stepping closer. "Maybe I'm a player." He finally looked at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes stole her breath. It was a maelstrom of conflict, duty, danger, and a deep, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. The tension that had been simmering between them for days finally broke. He crossed the space between them in 2 steps. He didn't grab her or command her. He simply stopped in front of her, his presence overwhelming. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her face, his fingers tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You are the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to me, Lena." The confession hung in the air, more intimate than any declaration of love. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. When his lips met hers, it wasn't a kiss of passion, but one of surrender. It was soft, hesitant to question. She answered by leaning into him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. The kiss deepened, becoming a release of all the fear, the tension, the terrifying, magnetic pull that had defined their every interaction. It was a flaw in the pattern, a disruption in the game, and it was the most real thing either of them had felt in a very long time. The kiss was a quiet cataclysm. It broke down the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself and shattered the fear that had been Lena's constant companion. For a single, breathless moment, they were not a Yakuza boss and his unintended target. They were just a man and a woman, finding a fragile point of connection in the midst of chaos. His hands moved from her face to her waist, pulling her flush against him. She could feel the solid strength of his body, the frantic beating of his heart that now matched her own. It was a kiss that spoke of desperation and discovery, a silent acknowledgement that their lives were now irrevocably tangled. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, the air in the room thick with unspoken words. The cold, sterile penthouse suddenly felt warm, charged with a new and dangerous energy. Kaido rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "I should have taken you home the moment I saw you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have let you walk away. You couldn't have," Lena whispered back, her fingers tracing the collar of his shirt. "Tanaka's men were already watching. We were both trapped the moment you sat down, it was true." They were bound not by choice, but by circumstance. Yet this feeling, this raw, undeniable connection, felt like a choice. It felt like the only choice that mattered. He looked at her then, his dark eyes searching hers, and a real, unguarded smile touched his lips. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated wonder. He was about to say something else, something important, when the sharp, intrusive buzz of his phone on the desk sliced through the moment. The world came rushing back in. With a sigh of frustration, Kaido straightened up, the professional mask sliding partially back into place. He picked up the phone. It was a message from Run. Lena watched as every ounce of warmth drained from Kaido's face, replaced by a glacial coldness that was terrifying in its speed. The transformation was absolute. The lover was gone. The killer was back. His knuckles were white as he gripped the phone. Without a word, he turned the screen toward her. The image was a high-resolution photograph, clearly taken with a long-lens camera from a building across the street. It was a live feed. It showed a room, a sniper rifle being assembled on a tripod, its barrel aimed directly at the penthouse window, where they had just been standing. And standing next to the unseen sniper, directing his aim with a cold, satisfied smile, was a beautiful Japanese woman with hate-filled eyes. Tanaka's message was just delivered, Kaido said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. It was Akari, the woman from the blind date. The woman Lena had replaced. And she had come to correct the insult herself. The game wasn't over. It was just getting personal. And Lena was no longer just a symbol. She was the prize.